Hello, everybody. My name's Louis Yakumi from LConnect. Great to have another in conversation with part of a series of conversations with leading global automotive, logistics, and supply chain executives. And I'm very pleased to have a good friend of mine who I've known for a few years joining us today, Mike Polich, who's got an interesting background, but currently at Honeywell. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Louis.
Let's start a little bit on your background. You know, you've got an interesting kind of history and trajectory. So, can you tell us a bit where you started in logistics or automotive and where you are now?
Sure. Education-wise, I grew up the Michigan area, so I'm very near to the auto industry. My father was at Ford Motor Company for the early part of his career. He made it really clear to me I needed to become an engineer because he said the engineers always went home at 4 o'clock, which never turned out to be true. But so my education, MBA were in Michigan, but started my career out at a company called Guardian Glass for a short stint. I wanted to get to Ford, but Guardian Glass in the Detroit area was my first stop, manufacturing auto and architectural glass and fab processes. Got into Ford at 1997 in material handling and packaging engineering group. At the time, was part of advanced manufacturing. The initial job was doing CAD work uh, for designing shipping racks. That migrated into program forecasting and ultimately doing a lot of material flow engineering for the truck programs across Ford Motor Company. Had other roles in there, leading packaging engineering, leading North American vehicle distribution. Had an opportunity when they were based over in Bangkok for Asia Pacific as we were training and launching teams in India and China, and had an opportunity to spend time in South Africa post-apartheid as we converted that plant back to build the European Ranger. Uh, After Ford, I spent 16 years. From Ford Motor Company, I joined Tesla. And time frame wise, this was a early Model S. I remember leaving because when I told my team I was going to Tesla, they thought I was going to a rock band. And we had just come from the Detroit Auto Show. They looked it up on the internet. That literally, this was the understanding of Tesla at that point. So they looked it up and they said, oh, okay. So joined Tesla beginning of Model S, and the role ended up being in logistics. Originally, I was recruited for production control. Uh, Tesla very different than Ford in that your job has very little to do with what you do, what needs to be done, whatever that happens to be. Spent 7 years there. So Ford, if you think of Tesla, think of the beginning of the Model S, the first shipments through the Model Y. And that was kind of the time frame I was in there. So probably average 50% annual growth during those periods. So production wise, I remember one of my first projects at end of quarter, I think I had to get 200 cars delivered. And then when I left, the site was building about 10,000 a week. Quite a bit of progress during that time. I'm currently at Honeywell. I've been here for 6 years. I was hired at Honeywell to centralize supply chain and specifically logistics and distribution here. Honeywell is made up of four verticals with about 30 P&Ls within those verticals. We were unlocking the potential of supply chain, something that auto, it's mandatory with the margins there. But at Honeywell, these businesses were all run separately. So a lot of consolidation and focus on how do we go do that and do it in a really scrappy environment.
Mhm. Okay. It's quite an interesting time. And, you know, who's Tesla was one of those things. And the second one is, I don't know if you found in logistics, do you still finish at 4 p.m. now?
But that no, not even close.
Yeah.
My dad was wrong on that one, but
Yeah, definitely.
I'm glad he forced me to go through engineering. That's been really useful.
So from Ford to Tesla, that's quite a shift. What was the biggest culture shock moving from an established OEM to a fast-paced startup as Tesla was at the time?
I think after 16 years at Ford was an amazing place for training. I mean, even if you think of Ford Motor Company, I joined in 1997 and adjusted for inflation. That was actually the peak market cap of Ford Motor Company. They approached that again in 2022. So when you're in a shrinking company for that long, the paper they print of all the things you have to learn to be ready for the next level grows. But it was phenomenal. Whether it was engineering training, it was management training, every single element, really, really well trained in everything. I think I left Ford thinking I was an expert, having been so well trained. So the biggest culture shock, and I credit the first leader I worked for when I arrived at Tesla. My leader had been from the tech industry. And I think this is the biggest difference in the culture. Ford Motor Company very much concerned about benchmarking, how they do things like Tesla could care less. In fact, if you spoke of it, you would be terminated. And that I got myself in trouble with saying at Ford. I had to remove that from my vernacular. And be, near the end, I wouldn't admit it. Now, what I will say is all of the skills I learned at Ford applied in a very different and agile way are extremely relevant. But the culture that Elon drives of first principles and understanding things at that level was not the way Ford operated. And having spent some time at Tesla and seeing the results of it, it was amazingly different in what the company was able to accomplish by doing things that way and the level of innovation that came out of that company over the years.
Yeah. At Tesla, you helped scale logistics during a period of explosive growth.
Mhm.
But what lessons from that time still guide your decisions today and from working at such a growth time?
As you work with, partners, you work with logistics partners, Elon always required a top-to-top relationship, which is important because if you tell him something's wrong, you're going to be on a call with the leader of that company. And I'm sure many of the leaders on your call list know that as well. Uh, and so I think it's really is you pick the partners that are passionate about it. And one of the things we did every time when you start out and you're trying to acquire logistics services at Tesla, you start out by putting together a pitch deck and you get people excited about Tesla, about the potential, about the growth. I think getting the right level of talent, having the right relationships as you build those global partners, and I think we did a really good job. We found companies that allowed us to go, despite being very small at the time. These companies were excited about the potential in the future, maybe more so than my team when I left in the rock band. But that to this day, you've got there's an A team and a B team everywhere. How do you go and you get really people excited and engaged in your mission? And so that's one of the things I use very frequently here.
Yeah. And and is I don't know going to there's so many startups in the EV world now, car makers and so on, and very globally included at the moment, especially China perhaps.
Mhm.
But it is the old world, for want of a better expression, is the traditional car maker a good what would be, in a hiring process, would you be better off from a tech company or from a car maker?
I, I think you would be best to come from software in some ways. Yeah, tech company, if you look at the skill set, and in my recruiting now, I'm very much the one thing very unique about my time at Tesla, we wrote all of the systems, the ERPs, there's some public stories about Elon, kicked out SAP very early in that. So we were tasked with writing all the modules.
Mm,
So you think, how do you create a transportation management system? How do you write the software? How do you recreate visibility systems? And the interesting part is that links really back to the early days of Ford. Ford, as an automaker, many of their own systems have those same similar origins. CMMS3, I think they have their Copac systems that they have for finished vehicle logistics. I still remember them. Early days of Ford, one cool thing is, they had three-ring binders, so they taught you how all software works. You go back to it and you go, and so I had a really good understanding of the algorithms behind software. I think that is one of the most important skills today. And I think we had talked before about the intersection of bits and atoms. If you take a company like Ford, think of how much of their structures are defined by the underlying systems of how they segment work and segment elements. And if you create a greenfield site, if you were to build systems today, if you look at how your company structures are done, you should really design them now around the data elements Our company structures, a lot of them have history that are based on pre-computer, the way we organize work, the way we do controls and governance. So I think people who are able to understand how software works, whether they wrote the software or they're looking at it, but then can also transform a business process. So
Yeah.
I work with, there's another outside organization, 0100, that I've been part of, a bunch of supply chain leaders. They call it, wizards. They have different levels, transformers, wizards. Are you able and really look at something and then change it at that fundamental level? That was an opportunity where, I felt like in the logistics space, we had an opportunity to create Tesla in a way the founders of Ford would have done it. And sure, some of the bigger, older companies, even a Honeywell, over time, you sometimes lose those skills. You're more reliant on outside vendors, you're reliant on consultants, and there's a bit of a pendulum there. You come up with these good business cases to outsource stuff, and then you forget how to buy it. And and so I think the Tesla, it was never an option under Elon Musk to buy software.
Yeah.
It was always go write it. And that single action there is one of their huge competitive advantages. You don't see that in a lot of the other
Yeah.
startups.
Yeah, and that's a great skill to have. You talked about the first principles kind of thing, and the worst thing you could say was, what we used to do at Ford or what the automotive industry or automotive logistics sector
Yeah.
usually does, or whatever it is. But how much time was wasted in a way by not just doing what you always did? Or would you say it was kind of 50-50, or was it, a big advantage or time save, or not time saver, was a big advantage if you never looked back?
I think it was a huge advantage over, if you think of, when I left for the view of Tesla, even as I left, they didn't even believe them to be a car company. They didn't even terminate me on my notice. That's one of my favorite stories. I worked my notice. I'm one of the few people that went to a car company and who worked their notice at Ford. And I think that, what they didn't understand, Elon constantly sends engineers on the hardest path, but the most valuable one from a first principles basis. I mean, you look at their latest Starship effort, he decided we're not putting landing legs on that. And when I hear those stories, I feel, memories of my own time there. How do those engineers feel when they're told, oh, no, you're going to catch the rocket with a couple of chopsticks?
Yeah.
And yet, Elon's approach to thing is it's always from that first principles basis. It's the harder path, but it drives a level of innovation that you see most of these other companies trying to copy. I mean, countless examples, single piece castings. Look at that, try to create like a Hot Wheels car. I learned at Ford, that's impossible.
Yeah.
So you look at, all of these elements and you go through it, they go and they take on challenges at a level that is it possible to do it? It might be really hard. And then they go and they assemble teams. You've got, from a hiring standpoint, they really do we have the right people to go execute that? And Elon does that really well.
Yeah, I think the automotive industry tends to complicate things a little bit in the sense of Toyota for many years led the way in supply chain and logistics with their, Toyota system and
Yeah.
TPS and so on. And everyone tried to copy it. Everyone had their own version, the Ford production system and the GM production system or whatever it is. But they never quite got it right because they overcomplicated it or didn't understand the basic principles. And I think it's the same a little bit with Tesla. Everyone sort of tries to copy Tesla, but they don't really get what the whole point of it was. Uh,
Yes.
they, I
100%.
think that's one of the issues.
I've been gone for 6 years, but it was beautiful in its simplicity of decision making. There was really one person.
Yeah.
That person had very high expectations as a leader in there. And this is also a very important point. Leaders of the future in this age with agentic AI,
Mm,
you're being a professional manager sort of thing, perfect management skills, but not weak technical skills. I think increasingly you will see fewer and fewer people like that can adapt to the future as it comes.
yeah.
Well, Tesla was a place where, as a leader, you had to understand the details to the nth degree within your team. You had to understand it rapidly, or for those who are, or you were fired. I mean,
Yeah.
if you didn't put in the time, you didn't do your due diligence, and you didn't understand at that level, or if you were wrong, if you weren't sure of something, you better tell him that, I'm only 10% sure. And
Yeah.
those things, anyone who's been around him has heard those things a number of times. So he's very focused on efficiency. He removed a lot of things that slow you down. No acronyms. That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite things because I know we have them here at my current company again. And I don't know that I appreciate it as much as when you go to a new company and what a barrier that is to learning and getting up to speed
Wow.
as
Yeah,
well.
definitely.
And also in a new company, democratization of data. Who has access to the data sets? How are those things structured?
Yeah.
It's, intelligence and being able to build intelligence, especially in supply chain. What structured data do you have available to you? How can you use it? Most kids come out of school today able to write simple software in Python and SQL, and we send them into companies and then we don't let them because that's a special department. And so that if you look at the companies who are really excelling right now, you see that. And when I came here to Honeywell, we wrote our own freight audit software here because I needed the data. I
Yeah.
mean, it was 15,000 freight accounts, three parcel companies across the entire world. We were a bit lucky here because Honeywell makes many connected products, building control systems, others. So we had a tech stack. Um,
Mm.
so you had some of the companies that really struggle with that right now are those who didn't really have that sandbox to play in and go create this environment.
Yeah. So what you've done at Honeywell now, you've brought together the tech operations and compliance into a single team. What's been the biggest advantage of this kind of integration?
Yeah, I think if you compare a Honeywell to the auto industry has always really tightly managed supply chain, really for two reasons. One, the margins are extremely low, so you need
Yeah.
to get into that level of detail. And
Yeah.
two, you build very few products. And
Mm.
so there's so many single points of failure that you need to have that level of control over the supply chain to make it work. Honeywell makes millions of possible products, and we look at a very, very complex environment across the companies. Um, but the margins that Honeywell's historically made are much higher than the auto industry on the portfolio of businesses within this. Um, what wasn't unlocked is, hey, what's the value of trying to go and approach supply chain on there? So the approach we've taken here to centralize the procurement of freight that's shared across the businesses. So in my time here, we've centralized the sourcing team, which reports to me. Operationally, we've got kind of a mix of in the between distribution and others reporting to me. And then we started doing FP&A off our data set for the 30 P&Ls. And it was really sometimes to go drive that, having an accurate scorecard is really important. And the auto companies tend to have a lot of fidelity into their understanding of their costs and their drivers. So we had to create that here as well, off the data sets. But it has been profound in unlocking what we pay to go execute within the supply chain. We pay for things like for like at pre-COVID levels, more than pre-COVID levels with no adjustment for inflation. And that was just the potential. What's the potential to get that done? And then how you do it in an environment where Honeywell is currently splitting into three companies. We have a smaller Solstice Advanced Materials, our chemical division, and then we're splitting Honeywell Automation from Honeywell Aerospace. So how do you do it in an environment with frequent M&A acquisitions and separations? So it adds another layer to, how do you do that and how do you continue that so you can go and keep moving and reshaping that portfolio? Yeah.
You've talked before about the intersection of bits and atoms. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people out there who aren't as tech savvy as I am in the automotive industry, especially in logistics. So, what does that mean for people in the logistics tech world?
Yeah, I think I borrowed that phrase. I don't know. I've seen it a lot with like Eclipse Ventures and which has a lot of former Tesla
Yeah,
personnel running there. But really, if you look at, again, getting back to when you see how processes work, and I'll translate it back to all of the Ford training. You would go at Ford Motor Company, you would go and you'd value stream map something, right? You want to understand it. That's really the value stream maps you see are a combination of bits. What are the systems? What are the digital elements of it? And atoms are people, their equipment, their factories, all of those elements in there, where that comes together. You'll find within, if you value stream map things, some of those things are very much process driven. The
yeah,
org structures may have been driven by process or they may have been driven by tradition.
yeah,
So the most powerful unlocking of value. So and I'll use Ford. You drive 10%, in my day, it probably hasn't changed, drive 10% productivity every year over year on those whole things. You can only go so far without changing the underlying foundation of how it works, underlying systems. And if you go over time, what are some of the highest margin products that companies have? Your tech debt. If you look at whether you created your software or whether you bought it, if you look at the margins in software companies, they're pretty good. A lot better than automotive, right?
Yeah.
So how much of that, even with your scale, how much of that do you want to buy and how much do you want to make? And
Mm.
I think what people, and I run into a lot of people that don't realize is I'm always reviewing new software. And in many cases, I do buy software here. We buy it, we don't write it all. But we're trying to create an environment where we're writing more of it.
Yeah.
Uh, the, there's a secret about software. It's actually really simple. And if you understand, if you were able to look at an Excel sheet and understand how a complicated formula worked,
Mm.
uh, you should know how to do that in the software that you're using and buying.
Mm.
So that's probably my favorite thing to do right now is to get into that space,
Mm.
create an environment where you can do software creation. Truth is, of all these things, 98% of the work is making sure how do you have all of that structured data. You realize every possible data element. So one of the things we used to communicate on the Tesla team was they'd ask, well, what data elements do you want? And we want everything you have. Everything. I don't know why I need it yet.
Yeah.
I think people understand that now. In a world of AI, you see people buying entire tech platforms like Twitter
Yeah.
to train the AI,
Yeah.
right? But as you run a company, having access to know your global trade data combined with your logistics data, you want to make sure, did you have digitized commercial invoices? So you can go every time the trade rules that change, can you go and track what's the impact? What was it, 2 days ago coming out of Mexico? Now there's new export controls on 30 HTS codes. How quickly can you as a company, I'm sure there's a lot of people working right now to
Yeah.
sort that out. And if you set up the digital structure beneath it for that data to be available, it takes 5 minutes. If you have that data accessible by a large language model, this generative AI, you don't have to create a BA chart anymore. You just ask the computer. It knows.
Yeah.
So if you look at the deployment of AI and agentic AI, it's very much a function of how far are you on the journey to have the structured data do you do to run your system. If you want to get really fancy, you can disassemble SAP or Oracle now. If you think of everything, what are those systems? Or, Ford's early systems, all of these were structured the same. They're a combination of data tables and formulas.
Yeah.
You can systemically take that apart as you go and build your new environment. And I think actually you'll see a lot of that. I'm
Mm.
not a huge fan of SAP, and I'll be happy to. Hopefully, they're not one of your sponsors. They had my entire career to solve supply chain problems, and um, they weren't solved with it. They were solved without it or on top of it.
Kind of looking back, perhaps you've covered it a little bit on some of your other answers, but what advice would you give your younger self or someone early in their logistics career now? Because you were always, when you did come to our conferences and so on, the one thing you were always interested in was to talk and listen to the young students we used to gather from the universities and so on. So
Yeah.
what advice would you give someone looking to be, in supply chain and logistics? Is supply chain and logistics still going to be a great career to be in?
Absolutely. I think it's a function even with the AI, how complicated the problems you go to solve. You don't want to be focused on one thing or another. I do a lot of speeches internally to interns. I tell them, when I went to college, they had they take an entire semester course and they compress it into 2 weeks. And I would say, other than foreign languages, art, or athletic skills, you should be able to learn anything in 2 weeks. And it's never been easier to learn or get information. It's also, there's an
Yeah.
abundance of information. You got to be careful you're getting
Almost
correct
too much.
information. But the going and learning, and then don't listen to old guys like me. I mean, I hate to say it, like I would go to the conferences. How many people there of the leader were speaking about how Tesla wouldn't succeed? I remember. So
Yeah.
I remember some people from Honda stepping up about how the business model won't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look on television. Bob Lutz was on television all the time while I was there, telling us how we were going to fail.
Yeah.
Um, I found all of that very motivating to me because I had given up. I mean, I walked away from Ford Motor Company. I wanted to really test myself. Tesla gave me that opportunity, and I got to work with a great team of people. Um, and so it's really important that, you go and you just keep that open mind. Don't necessarily listen to all the things that people can't say done. I mean, it ties very much back to what is first principles all about. I think I remind myself these three of the four pictures here, the fundamental forces, um, very similar to first principles. It's a reminder to me of to break things down to that level because that's really where the innovation happens. Um, when you document things too much, you tend to go and it becomes law.
Yeah.
And you addressed it in the operating systems and other elements. But so there's kind of a mix between, in a large company, if you don't document anything, it gets complicated. It really, it gets, how do you go run certain processes,
Yeah.
that element, if nothing's written down? I think Tesla tried to go as far as they could with, the no, a simple one-page employee manual and no other guidance, no documented processes, but that will take you to a certain point. That doesn't mean on the product, but those processes can be a huge barrier to innovation.
Yeah. So what is the sweet spot? You've worked in the rigid systems, you've worked in the perhaps, almost the chaotic systems in the
Yeah.
startups. What's the sweet spot? Have the traditional car makers who try and tell me that they're now operating like trying to have that startup mentality, are they anywhere near that yet? Have Tesla or other EV makers gone back a little bit and said,
I,
okay, we went too far with the other way?
my wife works at one of the major non-Tesla EV. We met at Tesla, but she's at one of the other ones in CapEx now, and I stay very close to the industry. Everybody's talking about Tesla killer, everything else. I think there's two other trends people should be looking at.
Mm.
I would say the biggest thing that scares me for the auto industry is uh, autonomous driving and asset utilization. So I think, the numbers I see, you look at automobiles, I think they're utilized 9% of the time, 10% of the time, and the rest of the time they spend their lives parked. So what happens to the global auto industry when that number reaches 20%, 30%?
Yeah.
How many, if you see, I mean, you've been through the Waymos and the other robo taxis, you see obviously Tesla's progressing into that and others. As that grows, I think people tend to focus too much on EVs. EVs, as Elon would say it, EVs, the technology, Tesla pulled ahead the evolution of the technology. Engineering does not advance, not at an industrial scale,
Yeah.
without people trying it. And so you have massive R&D and progress by all the companies in that space. I think is much more than an auto company. If they've tried to solve this autonomy, look at their programming around neural nets and vision only based systems.
Yeah.
Elon took the hard road again on that. I remember being there when he started that, and Mobileye left earlier than expected. And it was it, it is a harder road, but it has better benefits in the end. So my worry for the auto companies, one, are you competing with the right company? Is it even Tesla anymore? Is Tesla, I think, my latest take from Elon's return from Doge, the end of his initial period there anyway, is he thinks he's more valuable growing GDP. And when he says things like that, I, I understand him well enough. He's not kidding. So I would watch out for all of the areas where they start building mass scale products for
Yeah.
export. I think he literally will. He's probably sitting with his team and they've done the math on what do they have to build to be material in the world of US GDP. Uh, and so uh, those are kind of the things that I've taken away and I continue to drive.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mike. That's really been listening to it has been an interesting journey, and you've lived through it. So you've got a great experience there. and you look like you still got that big smile on your face, which we don't often see in automotive logistics anymore.
Maybe I've just had too much of a break. I like solving big problems. Ford Motor Company, I worked in each case, I worked with great groups of people. I would say, at Tesla really gave me an opportunity to work on some fun problems. The same is true here. And there's a lot of people in the logistics industry taking on those big challenges. Those are the ones I enjoy helping with the most. And that's why I smile. Um, it's changing really rapidly. So hopefully I'm not done. This isn't a swan
Yeah.
song of my career.
No, no, I'm sure it isn't. And automotive, I've got a couple of interviews coming up. In fact, there's one with Adidas, the sports manufacturer,
Yeah.
about going from automotive to other industries,
Mhm.
from other industries to automotive. Is there enough of that sharing of different sectors? Is automotive a good starting place to go on elsewhere? Should automotive be hiring people from different industries into that? I'm talking about logistics and supply chain.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for, if you're looking for problem solvers, I think we limit too much. We look for X number of years experience in a very specific area, and I think we couldn't be more wrong about that. I think absolutely that, cross generation of skill sets. I think we've all seen it in every company.
Yeah.
You see it in different formats. There's some people say like 20% of the people are doing 60% of the work. Usually they're the ones that figure it out and solve different problems, and it's a little more technical than it used to be with
Yeah.
you got to know more about the bits
Mm.
than you did in the past. But I think more people like that in it. And I think especially when you look in a world of AI, things that you can turn into a flow chart and offshore are really solved by AI agents now.
Yeah.
So staying in that space where you really like to solve the toughest problems. That's the interview question, actually. I
Yeah.
ask everyone, what's the toughest problem you've solved in your career?
Yeah. Well,
So,
mine would be marriage, but that's another story.
yeah, no comment.
Okay, Mike. Well, thank you very much for a great interview. Very interesting.
Thanks, Louis.
I'm sure people are in the industry externally, and the next generation of students coming in will find this very interesting. Thank you very much for your
If
time.
not, they never made it to the end here. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Bye.